At the First Continental Congress in 1774, something pretty special happened. A motion was raised to open the meeting with prayer, and one of our founding fathers, John Jay, opposed. He believed the division of religious sentiments among the men hindered their ability to pray together. Samuel Adams jumped up immediately, outrageously concerned about the precedent that failing to pray at this important meeting in America's history would set for future meetings in the generations to come. He reminded the men that they were brothers of one faith, and they needed nothing more than a common creator to join together in prayer. So they put it to a vote, and Samuel Adams' case won in a landslide. With their ballots cast and their minds made up, all of the men present at the meeting, including John Jay, joined hands, bowed their heads, and they prayed. Today, in nearly all parts of the country, if you were to suggest opening a meeting in prayer or request to pray aloud inside the doors of public institutions, you'd be met with resounding opposition. However, unlike in 1774, it wouldn't come from a well-intentioned John Jay concerned about your individual denominational preferences, and there would be no Samuel Adams to remind the people of their common creator. Instead, people will argue about whether or not religion has any place in America at all. People are beginning to ask whose moral considerations, if any, should direct the legislation, and where exactly does Christianity fit into the founding of our nation. As I've conducted my research, I've begun to realize that a lot of people don't really understand our founding fathers. Some people, probably some of you in this room, think that the founding fathers were super orthodox, very religious, and that they had specific Christian intentions for America. Other people, maybe even still some of you in this room, think that the founders were deists and non-religious and wanted to get away from anything that resembled the religious association they'd experienced in England. Very few people understand the real relationship between Christianity and our Constitution. I think that the best way to begin to tackle this issue would be to look for advice from the men who struggled with this question first. The words in the founding documents, the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution, as well as the beliefs expressed by the men who wrote them, offer the best insight about the relationship between Christianity and our nation's founding. Now, I can't tell you exactly what the founders believed, because I never knew them and I didn't get to speak to them. If I had, this probably would be a lot easier. But what I can tell you about is the relationship and the record of all the things that they wrote and that they said in their lives. John Adams, for example, was always a particularly prominent voice about his own private religion. He said, "My religion is founded on the love of God and my neighbor, on the hope of pardon for my offenses, upon contrition." And while it is difficult to put any one of our founding fathers into a specifically defined religious box, it seems pretty clear to me that John Adams believed in the Christian God. In 1802, Thomas Jefferson first used the phrase separation between church and state. Although commonly misinterpreted and often ignorantly cited as actually being in the Constitution, Thomas Jefferson wrote the phrase in a letter simply to express his own opinion about the sanctity of religion and the corrupt nature of governments instituted among men. John Jay argued that due to this inherent corruption, without God's blessing, all of their efforts would inevitably have failed. The people, and more importantly, the founding fathers of America, could be called Christian. America was founded on Christian values, and the founders valued Christianity. However, these things don't necessarily imply that America is a Christian country. Throughout the rest of history, the discussion developed in a few different ways, but two more very important pieces of evidence stand out that I need to tell you about. The signature of President George Washington can be found on a treaty with Tripoli that says that America was not founded on the Christian religion. 200 years later, President Barack Obama, on his recent presidential trip to Turkey, announced to the world that Americans do not consider ourselves a Christian nation. To nearly the same audience, to settle the exact same conflict, our first president and our current president made the same statement: America is not a Christian nation. This, of course, begs the question, what is a Christian nation? Self-professedly, Spain and Ireland are Catholic nations, Iraq and Indonesia Muslim nations. The common thread between these is that the religions they are associated with are the religions of their governments. Certain religious majorities either run or have the support of the people who run the government. That's what the term religious nation implies. A Christian nation would be one which is governed by Christian men who legislate consistently according to a Christian doctrine. While it can certainly be said that America had a religious majority, the founders took special care to keep religion out of the hands of the government. Christianity is present in our Constitution and its principles, but the Constitution was not written to make America Christian. The evidence of a definitive role of religion in our nation is likely to be misinterpreted because the Constitution contains so few religious references. We can only infer that because Christianity was left out of the structure of the federal government, it wasn't intended to be a defining part of it. Christian references are not in the Constitution. However, they are in the Declaration of Independence, which is much more religious and always intended to provide a context for all of the claims made in the Constitution. American democracy was founded, established, and ratified by men who endorsed Christianity and a people who embraced it. The Christian cosmology and the ideas that shaped Western culture in the time of America's founding were rooted in Christianity. The founders erected a separation between church and state to protect these views, for they believed that religion was an essential thread of the fabric of a nation's philosophy, for it is capable of governing that which the law cannot, but which is nonetheless so vital to a nation's prosperity, the hearts of the people. The absence of Christianity in the Constitution is a very significant indicator of its intended place in our country. When asking whether or not America is Christian, we have to consider how and to what extent Christian values were intended to influence the law. The answer is pretty obvious. The founders did not want any one religion by itself to be the only advisor of legislation. Such religious jurisdiction would threaten the religious liberty that the founders valued so highly, a value which gets all the evidence it wants from the placement of the First Amendment, freedom of religion, at the very top of the Bill of Rights. Religious legislation, laws which mandate according to a religious morality, or laws which consistently respect one religion over all of the other religions should have no place in America. If the founders should ever subsidize just one particular church or religion, or require church attendance, it would be a shocking departure from the very clear directives of the formative documents of our country. Religious legislation does not belong in the government of America. Historian John Meacham poses this challenge to us. It is not for priests or pastors or presidents or kings to compel belief. For to do so trespasses on each individual's God-given liberty of mind and heart. If the Lord himself chose not to force obedience from those he created, then who are men to try? Author and speaker Greg Kuchel offers a very accurate summary about the intended place of religion in America. The First Amendment ensured the liberty needed for Christianity to be a moral beacon and a preserving influence, but it also ensured that Christianity would never be the law of the land. The founders were looking for a balance. To use Meacham's words again, the state can give the opinion of the religious no special standing. The importance of such a custom lies in the freedom it gives the officials of the government to conduct the affairs of the nation without having to seek the sanction of any church. Religious values may affect and influence the conduct of the government, just as any other values may. But in the end, the decision is the government's to make, which is precisely what the founders wanted. Christianity's standards are not the only ones which influence legislation, a fact which clearly separates our nation from the religion. And if America's government, called throughout history a representative government, is not Christian, America is not Christian. The absence of Christianity in the Constitution was purposeful. However, the Constitution was always meant to be read in the context of the claims made in the Declaration of Independence, which overflows with a religious motivation and the Christian spirit. The Declaration of Independence recognizes a creator as the endower of our natural rights, as well as the duty of the people to defend and protect those rights from a government which might threaten to take them away. Great Britain, for example. The need to display the moral and religious sentiments of our founding fathers was met in the Declaration of Independence, leaving the Constitution free to serve only its intended purpose, which was to outline a framework of government. The distinction between these two very different roles of these two very different documents and the placement of Christianity in one and not the other is almost a sufficient answer by itself about the intended place of religion in America. Christianity was intended to be kept away from the federal government, but at the same time to directly influence the cosmology of private citizens. John Jay argued that if the people wanted Christianity in America, it would be their responsibility to elect the leaders that promoted that. The people, not the government, were counted upon to carry religion in this nation. Religion was abundant in 1776, and it saturated almost all of public life. Most people in the time claimed to be Christian or Catholic, and 2,500 people professed Judaism. In the words of Daniel Webster, general tolerant Christianity was the law of the land. But he called it Christianity nonetheless. The entire culture was influenced by what Rod Dreher would call a Christian cosmology, or a Christian nature of reality. He argued that you don't behave this way and not that way because it's good for you. You do so because this moral vision is encoded in your nature of reality. Americans had a very specific view of the nature of reality that was a product of its Christian roots. The Christian faith in America produced in its citizens the idea that we are in the middle, under God, above beasts, and at the same level as all other men. To preserve this cosmology that was so valued, the founders erected a separation between church and state. The state gave favor to no one religion, not even Christianity, and yet Christianity was still able to be relevant and active in America because the people acted in accordance with this Christian cosmology. Jefferson knew what he was saying when he first used the phrase separation between church and state in 1802. It wasn't an attempt, as it's commonly thought to be, to protect the government from religious influences. It was rather an attempt to protect the sanctity of religion from the unstable nature of the government. James Madison knew that as men, we are not capable of forming or establishing a perfect government. And he understood the consequences of subjecting God's holy religion to a sinful institution made by men. One very famous French politician, Alexis de Tocqueville, records his opinion, a foreign outsider's opinion, of American democracy in his book titled Democracy in America. If the Americans, who change their head of state every 4 years, who every 2 years make a choice of new legislators and replace provincial administrators each year, if the Americans, who have subjected the political world to the attempts of innovators, had not placed their religion somewhere outside of all of that, what would it hold on to in the ebb and flow of human opinions? The Founding Fathers and many members of our first Congress believed in a separation of church and state for that very reason. In a world where men are not perfect, neither citizens nor politicians, something must hold men accountable. The laws can try and keep men from doing bad things, but we know they don't stop them. And if the law can't eliminate evil actions, how can it have a prayer of smothering the evil wills and evil impulses and evil desires that begin to arise as we leave behind the Founding Fathers' Christian cosmology? So, what are we supposed to do with all of this? The grounds from which we draw discussion today about all of the political controversial issues must be relevant to people of all religions or to people of no religion if we are to respect the decision the Founding Fathers made not to write Christianity into the Constitution. However, we do still have a duty as Christians to preserve the Christian values that helped guide all of our Founding Fathers' decisions. Now, I don't have the space or time to give you true or valid or evaluate the truth or validity of the following potential arguments. But what I hope to do is offer you an idea of the direction that your arguments with a non-Christian about hot political topics today should take. I guess we should just start with the biggest one. Let's use homosexual marriage, for example. We could argue that the state's interests wouldn't be furthered by passing a legislation, that the practice was somehow harmful to society, or maybe that the government, at least on the federal level, shouldn't be involved in recognizing marriages at all. Again, I can't tell you if these are good or true or valid, as I haven't researched them thoroughly. But notice how one does not have to have a Christian perspective in order to understand these arguments. In addition, if the argument could indeed be made, we could say that the founders valued a traditional view of marriage, which you could argue was a product of their Christian beliefs. But we can use that argument not because Christianity supports it, but because our founding fathers supported it. America's founding fathers took great care to make this nation one that would endure. For ourselves and our posterity do we ordain and establish this Constitution for the United States of America. You have a responsibility to care about the Christian values that shaped this great nation, even if you don't agree with their source. They are not significant because of the religion that they come from. They are significant because without them, American democracy would not have lasted so long. Thank you.